this is Gabrielle Martin, and in this presentation we're going to talk a little bit about assessment, specifically formative and summative assessment in mathematics. So last week Steve talked about his 7 principles of assessment and different aspects of assessment, and in this one we're going to drill down just a little bit more on specific strategies that I've used in my classes and how I see the balance of formative and summative assessment working both online, in class, and through any transition in between. So first up, the concept of formative versus summative. Now in math, I don't know about you, but I feel like math, the way I've always been taught and the way I've experienced it for the most part, operates hugely on summative assessment, end of unit tests, midterm exams, final exams, and in a lot of courses that you take post-secondary. Sometimes those are even the only options that you have for assessment, so you don't get a lot of feedback until you get to those big summative pieces. So my goal in my classroom is to build in more and more formative options, because the big question I'm trying to answer is, when am I going to get a chance to identify and find out when they're on the wrong track? And I want that to happen as early as possible in the process. Now, traditionally in my classroom, we would teach a section. I would do a little bit of anecdotal observation based on how well they seem to grasp. I would read my class as I was teaching to get a sense of, do they seem like they're picking it up? Are the answers they're giving back to me as we're conversing on the right track? And then I would send them away with some practice questions or exit tickets or whatever. And these are great little opportunities to get a sense of where everybody is. Now, one of the big things when we move into online capacity, one of the big misconceptions is that we lose all of those little opportunities. And while it's true that when you're teaching asynchronously or you're teaching via Zoom or another video conferencing tool, reading your class and the feedback that they give you very informally in the terms of body language and facial expression, we do lose quite a bit of that. That is true. But there is an incredible opportunity here as well to more formalize those formative options. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So there are ways that we can do these quizzes. We can do homework questions or practice questions or exit tickets or whatever you want to call them. And we can find ways to read them from that feedback, so that the assessment, the formative pieces in particular, start generating data in a very computery kind of way. Yes, it's actually data coming back at us, but it's concrete data that we can use. And this can be used both at the secondary level, but also from K to 9 for younger levels. Now, is it going to look a little different? Absolutely. It's going to be perhaps a little more parent-assisted, a little more visual as opposed to reading-dependent, sure. But there are tools that can be used to get that formative, quick feedback. So the bottom line is, we want to be able to spot when they're on the wrong track, and we want to be able to spot it early and course correct as we're going. Okay, so keep in mind 3 primary purposes of assessment. And of course, this is open to debate hugely, but I want my students to be able to practice their skills. So the assessment, whether it's formative or summative, should provide an opportunity to practice, and then most importantly, to get feedback based on that practice. What are you doing well? What did you get? No problem. What are you still processing? What are you still working on? What needs some work, some improvement? What needs clarification? What did you perhaps misunderstand from my direct instruction piece, or misunderstand about that particular tool or that particular process? Where did you go wrong? How can we fix that? And even better, if we can figure out why you went wrong, what was the source? Was it just a small mistake, or was it a fundamental misunderstanding that needs correction? And of course, what I would consider to be the least important aspect of assessment is, of course, we do need it for reporting purposes. And of course, that's why summative assessment ends up, in a completely practical sense, forming such an important part of assessment. But I would argue that the 2 most important features are the opportunity for practice and feedback. So that's what I've been trying to move my assessment towards in recent years, is really providing opportunities for practice and feedback as early as possible in a process. So by the time we get to our summative assessment, then they have real information about where they are with material and what needs polishing for that kind of final push. And the nice thing about all of this is that none of this is different online versus in the classroom. It's just that how we allow for the practice and feedback might look a little different. but there is an incredible opportunity here offered by the online tools. And anything that you invest in preparing online tools in terms of assessment, anything invested now, the nice thing about it, it's not lost when you move back to your classroom, because anything that you prepare using an online tool can still be used when you transition back to your classroom. And in fact, the data gathering potential of these tools is incredible, especially once you're back in a classroom, because then you can add it to what you can read from your students in person, okay? But it does actually provide quite a lot even when you're not seeing them in person. So once you have given them the opportunity, so for example, I've got a list of tools, I think, on one of my next slides. So say one of my favorite things is H5P and Edpuzzle. They function very, very similarly. And with H5P, what I do is I create my video in my direct instruction. So I'm teaching a new section on, say, the sine ratio in trigonometry. And I teach and I do a few examples, and it matches up to their notes, and all this is great in terms of instruction, and I explain, and they can pause, and they can hopefully understand. And then the problem is then I'm waiting for them to come to the synchronous session and say, okay, I had trouble with example number 2. Can you go through that again? And a lot of students don't have that comfort level to either A, be able to identify what they had trouble with, or B, speak up and say, I had trouble. Okay, so problem there. And there's a little bit of disconnect. And this is where the online tools become fantastic. So with H5P, I record my video, I bring the video. So just to be clear, I upload it to YouTube. H5P doesn't allow you to store big files. YouTube does. So I upload to YouTube, and then I take the link to H5P. And H5P and Edpuzzle, very similar. They allow you to embed questions within. So this is where my formative assessment comes in. And I give the kids marks for completing the lesson, right? So they watched the video, they completed the tasks associated with it. I don't care if they got them right or wrong for that purpose, for the counting of the mark. It's more of a participation. What I care about in terms of did they get them right or wrong. So if I'm going through and the same way I would prompt them in class with, okay, what's the next step? What do I do next? I do that in a video. In the video, it's a question, and it pauses the video, forces them to choose a response, and then we move on with the recording after they've answered. The recording resumes. And so then when I can go back and see, okay, how many people knew what the step was? Okay, so what I might be looking for there is, what are their foundational skills like? Who needs review on the supporting pieces? So yeah, today we're talking about the sine ratio, but maybe they had a little trouble with rearranging equations. And if they missed that first question, okay, now I know for future reference that rearranging equations is something I should go over in detail. And then at the end, I'll put a little question that says, now try this one on your own. And again, video pauses, they have to try it, they have to choose an answer, and then the video moves on. And now I can see, okay, who can replicate, who can do what I showed them, who can do a similar example. I can build on that as well, and I can do more advanced. So who's got it in a way that they can apply it in a way that's different from what they've already seen. So now each of these pieces of data gathering, I can see at a glance from my class results. What do I need to recap? Do I need to spend time on foundational skills? Do I need to spend time on the actual mechanism of today's lesson? Do I need to move on? Is everybody good with all that? And so maybe now we can get into some real concrete applications or really advanced applications. So all of these pieces are incredibly informative. They give the kids that chance to practice. They give the kids that chance for a little bit of instantaneous feedback, but more importantly, they're giving me tremendous information that I can now use to inform what I do next. So I can use these videos as a primer for my synchronous meetings, because now I know what they need more on. I can use it to adapt. So wow, like if I just bombed that, nobody understood anything. Well, clearly we need to revisit and reapproach this. I can identify areas that might be for certain kids, so I can differentiate who needs follow-up in what place, who needs practice with their order of operations, who needs practice with reorganizing equations, things like that. And then I can really drill down and see, okay, who's consistently not getting the last few sections? That kid might need a little bit of individual attention. And again, these can be used once they're set up. You can use them year after year, both in school and online, regardless of circumstance, because this can become something they can access from your classroom. If you are a school that embraces the device in class, it's something that this can be their homework. And those videos, even if you're teaching live in class, having those videos for them to be able to watch later make great review for them when they come up to the summative assessment. So anything invested here is really a valuable investment in the long term. Okay, so Edpuzzle H5P, they're pretty similar. They both allow you to kind of build questions into these multimedia pieces. Moodle quizzes, I assume you can take up, I'm a Moodle user myself, but I assume a lot of the other LMSs will have something similar. And a lot of these, of course, yes, they're multiple choice or they're short answer. I use the short answer feature quite a lot, and I give them very specific parameters as to how they have to express their answer. But again, this makes the quizzes automatically graded, so it requires no time for me to actually correct the assessment. The students get instantaneous feedback. I like to give them the opportunity to retry questions, so there's an incentive to go back and I want that perfect score. I want to get all the questions right, and so they get a chance to kind of go back and revisit the work, and there's a bit of an incentive to do so. And again, I can see the results after the fact, and I can use that to inform what happens next. Desmos is a great resource now if we're talking the lower grades. So these videos, the interactive videos, they go over really well with kids, I think pretty much of all ages. Understanding, of course, that with the youngest kids, you're not able to rely on the reading component. But you could use things like card sorting activities, which are available in Desmos. Desmos has some great graphing tools as well. Of course, that's what they're known for. So I strongly recommend that you check those things out. And a lot of the things that might be your favorite things to do for kind of casual mathematical assessment in your class, you can find a tool to help you do that. One of my favorite things this year for assessment, I actually used it for my final summative assessment, but it wasn't just summative. I was able to turn it into a formative assessment as well, was I used VoiceThread. And talk about differentiation. I'm going to warn you up front, this took a fair amount of time, but because we didn't have final exams this year, I had a little bit of leeway. In going forward, I see myself using this on a student per student basis when the kid is in need of a little extra support. So what I did in VoiceThread was I created a little, all I did was actually upload a file. So it was probably an old test or worksheet. And I asked the student to work through the questions and use the voice or the audio comment option. So you can, in VoiceThread, you can actually write on the screen, which is cool, using your mouse or trackpad or tablet or whatever. And I had them do that, so they're actually doing the written part of the question while talking through their thought process. And this was an incredible opportunity for me to hear their reasoning, what they were doing, why they were doing it, and then I could hear where they were going wrong, where they needed correction, where they were getting stuck. So then I could point them in the right direction. Like, geez, you're almost there. Just think about this. What would you do if you thought about it in this context? And I was able to respond with my own verbal comment. And so that combination of the written and the verbal is now hitting a different type of learner as well, and it's great for addressing special needs. It's good for everybody really in a lot of different ways, but that ability to hear their thought process was just incredible. So there's all sorts of tools out there that you can use. And again, this data being produced, what you're able to record and recognize, and the conclusions you're able to draw, both about your class as a whole and their needs, your individual students and their needs, your performance on various topics, and whether maybe the whole class had trouble with that, I need to come back and figure out a different way to explain it. So there's really a treasure trove of data to be had there with these tools, and they can be used whether you're in school or online to complement your in-school, your brick and mortar education or your online education. They really, really do allow that transition to move and to be used kind of interchangeably in both. So the going back and forth for next year, again, we don't know what we're facing. So being able to move back and forth, and if you're using common tools in both environments, then that makes for an easier transition as well. So just some examples of how I have used assessment this year, both in the online and in my brick and mortar. The H5P is something I actually used all year long for a flipped class, and I would highly recommend that. I think next year, even in my face-to-face classes, I think their homework pieces are going to be those H5P and Moodle quiz kind of tools. Super easy once they're in place, then they're huge time savers while also being incredibly informative. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out. If you have any ideas that you'd like to share with me, I would love to hear them, because I'm always looking for new ways, new tools, things that work, so we can get creative about figuring out where the kids are and how to help them get to a better place when it comes to both their mathematical skills and their mathematical attitudes. Thank you so much for listening today, and have a lovely afternoon.